She said, "I don't owe you loyalty until there's a ring." I said nothing and moved out. A year later, she got engaged to the guy she'd been seeing behind my back. He left her at the altar for her best friend. She called me crying. I said, "Guess the ring didn't guarantee loyalty after all." Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. The words didn't hit me like a slap. They settled over me like a clinical diagnosis, cold and terminal. I don't owe you loyalty until there's a ring on my finger, Mark. We're not married. We're just dating. Sophia was on our living room couch, one leg tucked under her, as composed as if she were explaining a mildly interesting article she'd read. Her tone wasn't angry or even defensive. It was dismissively instructive. I stood by the fireplace, a hollow space where we'd promised to hang a future wedding photo, holding her tablet. On the screen was a text thread with a contact saved as Liam W. Work. The message I'd seen, the one that had turned my stomach to liquid lead, was from him, sent just an hour earlier. Can't stop thinking about last night. Your laugh is my new favorite sound. Counting the hours until Thursday. Don't tell the roommate. Winky face. My mind flashed to yesterday. I'd made her chicken soup because she'd claimed a headache was coming on. I'd brought it to her in bed, rubbed her temples. She'd smiled faintly, pecked my cheek, and spent the rest of the evening on her phone, smiling at the screen. Dating, I repeated, the word ash in my mouth. Yes, she said, as if affirming a simple truth. We have no legal, binding commitment. We're two independent people choosing to spend time together. I looked from the tablet to her. 3 years. 3 years of choosing her, every day. I remembered saving secretly for the ring, a solitaire with a sapphire on either side, because she loved the color of the ocean. I remembered driving across town at 2 a.m. to get her medicine. I remembered building the bookshelves in this room with my own hands because she wanted a personal touch. I was her boyfriend, her handyman, her nurse, her emotional support animal. And I was her roommate. Who is Liam? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. She didn't even flinch. She sighed, a put-upon sound. He's a colleague. A strategic partner, really. He's brilliant. He sees the world in terms of opportunities, not obstacles. Opportunities, I echoed. Don't make that face. You're a great guy, Mark. Stable. Reliable. But what if the ring never comes? I can't put my life on hold waiting for a promise that might just not materialize. She gestured vaguely at the air between us. Liam and I have a connection. He sees me. He challenges me. You maintain me. You keep the lights on and make sure the fridge is full. Each word was a precise, surgical cut. Maintain. Like I was an appliance. A reliable, boring appliance. So, you're sleeping with him. It wasn't a question. We're exploring a dynamic, she corrected, her chin lifting. A dynamic that is frankly more aligned with where I am in my life. When you propose, then we have a contract. Then exclusivity and loyalty matter. They're part of the deal. Until then, she shrugged, a small, infuriating motion. We're both free agents. It's only logical. Logical. The ice that had been creeping through my veins finally reached my heart and solidified. This wasn't a crime of passion, a drunken mistake she was trying to hide. This was a calculated philosophy. Our 3 years were a provisional arrangement. A trial run she felt no obligation to honor because the final paperwork wasn't signed. The pain was there, a deep, aching throb, but it was instantly eclipsed by a towering, crystalline clarity. I saw the last 6 months with brutal hindsight. The new, hushed phone calls she'd take in the other room. The emergency client dinners that ran late. The way, Liam says, had started peppering her conversations. Liam says my presentation style is too passive. Liam says true wealth is built on leverage, not savings. I thought he was a mentor. He was a replacement, auditioning for the lead role while I, the loyal understudy, kept the set warm. I placed the tablet gently on the coffee table, the movement slow and deliberate. The fight drained out of me, not into defeat, but into a profound, almost peaceful detachment. You cannot argue with a different fundamental reality. She believed loyalty was a transactional clause, activated only by a specific piece of jewelry. I believed it was the foundation you built everything else on. I see, I said, my voice flat and quiet. I understand your position perfectly. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, then satisfaction. She thought she'd won. She'd laid out her ruthless logic, and I had capitulated. She smoothed her shirt. Good. I'm glad you can be mature about this. It doesn't have to change anything between us, you know. We can just adjust the parameters. I didn't answer. I turned and walked towards our bedroom. Our bedroom. The one where I'd imagined our future children jumping on the bed on Sunday mornings. Where are you going? She called after me, a trace of annoyance in her voice. She'd expected more debate, more of me trying to prove my worth. My silence was an answer she didn't have a script for. From the top drawer of my dresser, I took out my grandmother's old leather suitcase. I opened the closet and began to methodically remove my things. My sweaters, my shoes, the few expensive suits I owned. I didn't look at her side of the closet. I didn't touch the framed photo of us on the beach in Costa Rica. Those belonged to the parameters, to the contract that never was. The sound of my zipper was loud in the silent apartment. It was the sound of a line being drawn, final and irreversible. The man who saved for a sapphire ring, who built bookshelves and made soup, was packing him up. He was leaving. And the woman on the couch, so confident in her cruel logic, had no idea that the foundation she'd taken for granted had just vanished from beneath her feet. The sound of the suitcase zipper was a full stop. In the living room, Sophia was silent. I imagined her perched on the couch, waiting for the next phase of the argument, my tears, my pleas, my attempts to negotiate. She didn't understand that the negotiation was over. I worked with a methodical silence. Clothes, toiletries, the few books that were truly mine. I left the linen we'd picked out together. I left the kitchenware my mother had given us as a housewarming gift. I left the framed print of the Brooklyn Bridge we'd bought on a weekend trip. These were artifacts of the us that, in her reality, had never truly existed. They were props for a play whose run had just been abruptly canceled. From the back of my closet, I retrieved a small lockbox. Inside was the ring, the solitaire with twin sapphires. I held the velvet box for a moment, not with grief, but with a surreal sense of curiosity. This little thing, I thought. This was the magic switch. The loyalty actuator. I almost left it on the dresser. A final, bitter parting gift. Instead, I slipped it into the inner pocket of my suitcase. It wasn't hers. It belonged to the man I was an hour ago, and he would need to sell it to fund his new life. I wheeled the suitcase through the living room. Sophia was still on the couch, but her composure had hardened into something brittle. She watched me, her eyes narrow. "What are you doing?" she asked. The dismissive instructor was gone, replaced by someone confused by a student deviating from the expected script. "Leaving," I said, not breaking my stride towards the door. "Where are you going?" She uncrossed her legs and stood up. "Mark, this is dramatic. We're talking. This is part of the process." I stopped at the front door, my hand on the handle. I looked back at her, at the apartment we'd made a home. I had made a home. For her, it had been a furnished waiting room. "The process is over," I said. "You explain the terms. I don't agree with them, so I'm terminating my participation. The lease is in your name. I've paid my half through the end of the month. My lawyer will be in touch regarding anything financial we need to untangle." Her mouth opened slightly. Lawyer. The word, so clinical and final, seemed to pierce her reality. This wasn't a lover's spat. It was a severance. You're just walking out? Over this. Her voice rose, tinged with the first notes of incredulous anger. "You're overreacting. This is exactly why I need space. You're so black and white, Mark. Life isn't a fairy tale. Relationships are complicated." I let her words hang in the air. I absorbed them. They were the frantic flailing of someone who'd pushed a button expecting a light to turn on, and instead heard the whole system power down. I turned fully to face her. My heart was a still, cold stone in my chest. There was no heat, only clarity. "You're right," I said, my voice low and even. "I am black and white. I believe in loyalty before the ring. You don't. You believe the ring creates the loyalty." I nodded slowly, the truth of it settling between us like a physical law. There is no middle ground between those two things, Sophia. There's no compromise. So, there's nothing left to discuss. I saw it hit her. The finality. The unbridgeable canyon she'd casually carved with her philosophy. For a second, her mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of something raw, not regret for hurting me, but panic at the sudden, total loss of control. "So that's it?" she spat, the panic curdling into defiance. "After everything? You're just going to run away?" A faint, Humorless smile touched my lips. No, I'm not running. I'm walking away. There's a difference. I opened the door. The hallway air was cooler, anonymous. Goodbye, Sophia. I pulled the suitcase over the threshold and closed the door behind me. The click of the latch was softer than the zipper, but more definitive. I didn't hear a sob or a scream from the other side. Just silence. I drove to a cheap extended stay hotel on the other side of the city. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale air. I sat on the edge of the bed, in the dark, and waited to feel something. Devastation. Rage. Anguish. But it was like a numbness had been injected directly into my soul. The pain was there, but deep, buried under layers of shock and that overwhelming clarity. The dominant feeling was emptiness. A vast, quiet void where 3 years of future plans had once lived. My phone buzzed in my pocket, then buzzed again, and again. Sophia, 9:42 p.m., this is childish. Sophia, 9:47 p.m., we need to talk about the couch. And the TV. You can't just abandon your responsibilities. Sophia, 10:15 p.m. Mark, call me. This isn't fair. I read the messages. The couch. The TV. She was speaking the only language she understood, transactional logistics. The loyalty clause was void, so now we were down to asset division. I didn't reply. I went into the settings and blocked her number. Then I opened every social media app and blocked her there, one by one. It wasn't an act of anger. It was hygiene, removing a source of infection. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of a world recalibrating. Over the next few weeks, I moved through life like a ghost. I found a small, furnished apartment. I went to work, performed my tasks with robotic efficiency. I told my closest friend, David, the bare facts. She was seeing someone else. She believed it was her right until marriage. I left. David, bless him, didn't offer platitudes. He just clapped my shoulder and said, Jesus, what's her name? I'll have the guys key his car. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted erasure. Glimpses of her new life reached me like signals from a fading star. Our one remaining mutual friend, Stacy, always more Sophia's friend than mine, sent me a wall of text. Stacy, I can't believe you're giving up so easily. Sophia is heartbroken. You really betrayed her trust by just abandoning her like that. She's with Liam now, you know. He's amazing for her. He's ambitious and exciting. You kind of pushed her into his arms by being so inflexible. You should have fought for her. I stared at the message. Heartbroken. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I pictured Sophia, spinning the story, painting herself as the victim of my rigid, outdated expectations. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. Me. I'm glad she's happy. Please don't contact me again about her. I blocked Stacy. A few days later, against my better judgment, I logged into an old Instagram account I rarely used. Her profile was public. The first post was a picture of her and Liam at a rooftop bar. She was tilted back, laughing at something he was saying. He was handsome in a sharp, polished way I wasn't. The caption read, "When you stop settling for comfort and start choosing spark. Sparkles hashtag new energy hashtag deserve it." I stared at the word settling. I thought of the chicken soup, the built bookshelves, the saved ring. That was settling. That was comfort. I closed the app. I didn't feel jealous. I felt a deep, weary validation. She had shown me exactly who she was. I had finally believed her. The void inside me began to change. It wasn't just empty space anymore. It was clean space. Room to breathe. I started running in the mornings, the rhythmic slap of my sneakers on pavement scouring my mind clean. I enrolled in a woodworking course at a community college, something for me, that required patience and produced something tangible from raw material. I started reading again, not for her approval, but for my own curiosity. I was not healing in a dramatic, montage-worthy way. I was reconstructing. Brick by quiet brick, I was building a wall around that clean, empty space, protecting it. And on the other side of that wall, Sophia's world, with its brutal logic and sparkling new energy, was already beginning to sound like noise from a distant, irrelevant street. The silence became my sanctuary. The running, the smell of sawdust in the workshop, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a book. These were the rhythms of my new life. The sharp, defining pain of Sophia's betrayal had dissolved into a dull, distant ache, and then into a kind of grateful insignificance. She was a chapter I'd read, understood, and closed. I hadn't just moved out. I'd moved on, at a molecular level. The news of her engagement arrived not with a bang, but as a piece of curious trivia, like hearing an old song you'd forgotten. It was David, over beers 8 months after my exit. He scrolled on his phone, then grimaced, sliding it across the table to me. "You're not going to believe this." It was Sophia's Instagram, a professionally shot photo. Her left hand, tipped with flawless manicured nails, was splayed dramatically across Liam's chest. On her finger was a garish, square-cut diamond, huge and glittering under studio lights. Her smile was triumphant. His was smug. The caption was a masterclass in performative bliss. "When you know, you know." He didn't make me wait for a maybe someday. He saw my worth and put a ring on it. Ring finally, a real commitment. Hashtag no more waiting, hashtag my forever, hashtag Team Liam. I took a slow sip of my beer. The initial sting was absent. In its place was a cold, intellectual fascination. The narrative was so transparent, so perfectly tailored. He didn't make me wait. I was the maybe someday. Liam was the decisive action. The ring was not just a promise. It was her trophy, her proof of concept. Her entire philosophy, the cruel logic she'd weaponized against me, was validated in that glittering stone. "You okay, man?" David asked, retrieving his phone. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. "Yeah, I am." And I was. I felt nothing for her, but a deep, almost philosophical curiosity about how the experiment would turn out. She had her contract. The loyalty clause was now, theoretically, in effect. I wondered if Liam had read the fine print. "She's a piece of work," David muttered. "She's consistent." I corrected, my tone neutral. "She got exactly what she said she wanted." Over the following months, I'd hear the occasional update through the fragile, gossamer thread that still connected our former social circles. The wedding planning was epic. It was to be a destination event at a vineyard. Sophia had chosen a designer gown that cost more than my car. Liam was killing it at his firm, traveling constantly to secure their future. The posts were a barrage of floral samples, cake tastings, and loved-up selfies with hashtags like hashtag power couple and hashtag blessed. Then, about 3 weeks before the wedding, the tone began to shift. A former colleague of Sophia's, a woman named Elise who had always been quietly decent, ran into me at the hardware store. After some awkward small talk, her expression turned pensive. "You hear about Sophia?" she asked, her voice low. "I see the highlights reel," I said, holding up a piece of sandpaper as if to indicate my disinterest. Elise leaned in slightly. "It's not all highlights. Liam's been absent. Like a lot. Business in Dubai. Last-minute client in Singapore. Sophia's been a wreck. Chloe's been the one running around, handling all the last-minute crises, calming her down. Chloe, Sophia's best friend since college. The maid of honor. The one who had always looked at me with a vaguely pitying expression. Sounds stressful? I offered, a non-committal murmur. "You have no idea," Elise said, shaking her head. "She looks exhausted. The sparkle's gone. It's all just frantic." I thanked her, bought my sandpaper, and drove home. The pieces were aligning with a silent, inevitable click. I didn't feel smug. I felt like an astronomer who'd calculated the trajectory of a comet destined to strike a barren moon. The impact was inevitable. It held no personal consequence for me. The week of the wedding, the digital silence from Sophia's world became absolute. The constant stream of updates ceased. The bridal party's social media went dark. It was the quiet before the cataclysm. The news of the catastrophe did not come from Elise. It came in a single, breathtaking text from a number I didn't recognize, late on a Saturday night. What should have been her wedding day? Unknown number. Holy shit. Mark. It's Ben from Sophia's brother's rugby team. You need to know. Liam. Chloe. They're gone. He left a text. At the altar. Said he couldn't marry someone whose best friend was more loyal to him. They've been together for months. They're in Costa Rica. The whole wedding is here. Parents are having a meltdown. Sophia is. I've never seen anything like it. I read the message twice. The details unfolded in my mind with cinematic cruelty. The vineyard, decked in finery. The guests in their summer linens. Sophia at the end of the aisle, in her monstrously expensive dress, facing not a beaming groom, but a panicked best man holding a phone. The murmur of confusion turning to horrified silence as the truth was read aloud, maybe passed from phone to phone. The collapse. The public, spectacular undoing. The karma was so perfect it was almost poetic. He didn't just leave her. He didn't just cheat. He used her own best friend, the architect of her comfort, to do it. And he invoked the very concept she had idolized, loyalty. He claimed Chloe had shown him more loyalty than Sophia had. He had turned her sacred contract into a joke and used it as his exit line. He left her not just heartbroken, but nakedly, utterly humiliated in front of everyone whose opinion she valued. Her trophy was revealed to be paste. Her power couple was a fraud. Her real commitment was a lie so blatant it would become legend. I didn't reply to Ben's text. I deleted it. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window of my quiet apartment, looking at the city lights. I thought of the chicken soup, the bookshelves, the lonely ring in my drawer. I thought of her calm voice explaining her transactional world. And for the first time since that night, I felt a single, clean emotion regarding Sophia. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't pity. It was the profound, quiet closure of a theorem finally proven. The experiment was over. The hypothesis that loyalty could be commanded by a ring had been tested under real-world conditions. It had failed catastrophically. The cosmos, in its ironic way, had delivered the peer review. And the result was a resounding, public, and brutally definitive no. The first contact was a ghost from a shipwreck, washed up on the shore of my new life. It was 3 days after the non-wedding. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I was in my workshop, sanding the curved arm of a rocking chair I was building, the fine dust hanging in the lamplight like gold. I answered out of habit. Silence, then a wet, ragged inhale. Mark? Her voice was shattered glass, slurred and thick with tears or alcohol or both. Mark, you have to. It was Chloe. There was no greeting, no apology, just a raw, immediate dumping of her horror onto my lap, as if I were still the receptacle for her chaos. I could hear a loud bar background, clinking glasses, blurred laughter. She was in public, falling apart. I said nothing. I held the phone to my ear and listened to the sounds of her unraveling. He left a text, Mark. A fucking text. To the wedding party. Her voice cracked into a sob. Everyone saw my parents. You have to come get me. Please. I'm at the Rusty Anchor. You remember where it is. Please. The plea was so entitled, so utterly devoid of awareness, that it almost circled back to being funny. You have to come get me. As if the last year hadn't happened. As if she hadn't drawn her line in the sand and called me a placeholder. I felt a profound, still detachment. Her pain was real, but it was hers. It belonged to the woman who believed in magic rings. It had nothing to do with me. I listened for another 15 seconds to her incoherent weeping. Then, without a word, I ended the call. I blocked the number. I picked up my sandpaper and resumed my work, the rhythmic shush 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 restoring the quiet. The silence held for a week. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, she was a washed-out impression of herself. Sophia stood hunched under a thin jacket, her hair plastered to her forehead, her eyes cavernous. She looked 10 years older. A part of me, the old, conditioned part, flinched. The instinct to open the door, to offer shelter, to fix. I let the feeling rise, acknowledge itself, and then dissipate like smoke. I opened the door, but didn't step back, filling the space with my calm. Mark. Her voice was a whisper. She looked past me, into my warm, tidy apartment, at the half-finished chair by the window, the books on the shelf. Her eyes widened slightly, taking in a life that was visibly and profoundly without her. Sophia. I made a mistake. The words tumbled out, rehearsed. The biggest mistake of my life. I see it now. What we had, it was real. It was loyalty. You were loyal without a ring. You loved me without a contract. She was parroting a script she thought I wanted to hear, her eyes searching mine for the familiar validation. I didn't move. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of observable distress. It held no warmth, no invitation. A flash of frustration crossed her face. My calm was a wall she couldn't scale. Aren't you going to ask me in? It's pouring. No. The single syllable hung in the damp air between us. Her composure, so fragile, began to crack. Why are you being like this? After what he did to me. After what they did to me. I was publicly humiliated. My life is ruined. I read about it. I said, my voice still even. And that's it. Sorry you're hurting? Her voice sharpened, the tears burning away into a familiar, righteous anger. You owe me more than that, Mark. You owe me at least a conversation. We had 3 years. There it was. The true colors, flashing bright and ugly. The entitlement. The ledger she still thought was open. You owe me. I looked at her, this stranger shaking on my doorstep, and felt the last faint echo of our past finally die away. I don't owe you anything, Sophia, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. You were very clear about what was owed and when. Good night. I closed the door, gently, but with total finality. I heard a muffled sound, a cry or a curse against the wood. Then, the sound of retreating footsteps on the wet concrete. The attempts didn't stop. They mutated. A long, rambling email arrived, full of self-help jargon and hollow realizations about unhealed childhood wounds, leading her to sabotage true connection. I deleted it unread after the first paragraph. A letter arrived, perfumed, on fancy stationery. It went into the recycling. She was trying on personas, the wounded victim, the enlightened therapy patient, the penitent lover. None of them fit, because none addressed the core rot. She was simply a person who had been cruel and had now been cruelly treated in turn. The universe had mirrored her, and she couldn't stand her own reflection. The final encounter happened not in the shadows of our past, but in the bright, mundane light of my present. A month later, I was at the upscale grocery store near my new office, picking up ingredients for a dinner date. I was meeting Clara, a landscape architect I'd been seeing for a few months. She had a laugh that sounded genuine and believed kindness was a default setting, not a negotiated term. I was selecting a ripe avocado, my mind pleasantly occupied with thoughts of her, when I felt a presence hover at my shoulder. Mark. It was her voice again, but stripped of all performance now. Just raw, desperate need. I turned. Sophia stood by the berry display. She was dressed neatly, but it looked like a costume. Her eyes were hollow, fixed on me with a terrifying intensity. The public meltdown was gone, replaced by a gaunt, single-minded focus. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Please, she said, the word barely a breath. 1 coffee. 10 minutes. I need to explain. I understand now. I understand loyalty. I understand what I threw away. It's all I think about. It's all I have left. She was trying to bypass my walls with a direct assault on my empathy. She was offering the one thing she thought I'd always wanted, her understanding of my core value. But the value wasn't a prize to be won. It was a principle I lived by, with or without her. I placed the avocado in my basket. I didn't move away, but I didn't step closer. I met her gaze, my own clear and untroubled. Sophia, I said, my voice calm in the cheerful store noise. I heard about what happened. With Liam. And Chloe. Her eyes flooded with a fragile, desperate hope. She mistook my acknowledgement for an opening. It was a nightmare. She rushed, her words tumbling over each other. You can't imagine. The ring, it didn't mean anything to him. He didn't understand what it was supposed to mean. I nodded slowly. I let her hope hang there for a second, a butterfly on a pin. I know, I said. It's ironic, isn't it? She blinked, confused by the word. Ironic. I paused, looking at her not with anger or pity or nostalgia, but with the calm certainty of a man stating a simple, proven fact. The theorem required its final, elegant expression. My voice was quiet, final, and carried the weight of the entire, sorry journey. I guess the ring didn't guarantee loyalty after all. For a second, there was no sound. The hum of the refrigerators, the chatter of other shoppers, it all faded. I saw the words travel the short distance between us and strike her with the force of a physical blow. Her face, for an instant, was a perfect blank canvas of horror. Then, it collapsed. It wasn't the dramatic, performative crying from the phone call. It was the silent, inward shattering of a fundamental truth breaking. Her entire philosophy, the clever, selfish logic she'd used to justify her betrayal, was reflected back at her, naked and ugly and utterly, catastrophically wrong. The magic switch was a dummy button. The contract was worthless. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I gave her a small, polite nod, the kind you'd give a distant acquaintance you pass on the street. Take care of yourself, Sophia. I turned my basket and walked away, down the brightly lit aisle, toward the fresh herbs and the good wine. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The closure was absolute, and it lived within me. I was already thinking about the garlic I needed to mince, the way Clara's eyes crinkled when she smiled, and the quiet, unshakable peace of a loyalty that had never required a ring to make it real. Her chaos was finally, and forever, someone else's noise. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Share it in the comments.